Well, this is the first story I believe I have received from London. I hired a private investigator in London to follow my wife because something about the way she'd been moving through our life for the past 6 months stopped making sense. I expected him to find an affair. I expected the late nights and the hidden phone calls to lead to another man, and they did. But what that investigator uncovered didn't just confirm the betrayal I'd suspected, it blew open a financial trail that proved she'd been systematically stealing from our marriage for years. I'm not talking about skimming a few $100 from a joint account for a shopping spree. I'm talking about tens of thousands of pounds moved into accounts I didn't know existed, funneled through her mother's name, and tucked into a savings structure specifically designed to make sure I'd never see it when the time came to divide what we'd built. She thought the affair was the big secret she had to protect. She thought if she could just keep the other man hidden, she was safe. But she was wrong. The affair was just the loose thread I pulled that unraveled everything. And the worst part, she wasn't just hoarding cash for her own independence. She was taking the money I earned working 12-hour days and using it to fund the startup costs for the man she was sleeping with. She was literally building his future with my paycheck. This is the full story of how a private investigator, a forensic accountant, and a shark of a solicitor helped me take apart a lie that had been running underneath my marriage for longer than I want to think about. To understand how blind I was, you have to understand the life we had. We'd been married for 12 years and together for nearly 15 by the time I started noticing the cracks. We met the way people used to meet, at a house party in Clapham when we were both in our early 20s. We started talking in a cramped kitchen with music bleeding through the walls, and I felt like I'd found the person I was supposed to build a life with. By the time this story starts, we were living the dream. We had a 3-bedroom, semi-detached house in Richmond that we bought in 2014 for £620,000. From the outside, we looked like the perfect, settled couple. We had 2 children in primary school. We had the nice car. We had the address. But financially, the dynamic was very specific. I'd built a career as a cybersecurity consultant, contracting through my own limited company. I was billing clients in the city at around £650 a day. On a good year, I was bringing in somewhere between £140,000 and £160,000 before tax. She worked part-time as an office manager for a small interior design firm near Kew, earning about £24,000 a year. She always called that her independence money, which was fine by me. I covered the mortgage, I covered the bills, I covered the holidays. Every major expense in our household came directly out of my earnings because I wanted to take care of us. I didn't mind being the provider. I took pride in it. I was putting a significant chunk of my income into a pension because my accountant kept hammering into me that it was the single biggest asset for our future. I thought I was securing our retirement. I didn't realize I was the only one playing for the team. The signs didn't arrive all at once like a dramatic reveal in a movie. They crept in slowly, one small shift at a time. It started with the schedule. She began working late on evenings when I knew for a fact her office closed at 5. When I asked about it, she had the answers ready. She was catching up on admin or meeting a supplier. Then the phone habits changed. Her phone went from being something she'd leave around the house without a second thought to something she carried into every room like it was attached to her hand. She even took it into the bathroom. The screen lock changed from a simple 4-digit PIN to facial recognition that only responded to her. She started paying more attention to how she looked on days she wasn't even going to the office. Outfits that didn't match a trip to the supermarket. Perfume on a level that used to be reserved for the date nights we had stopped having years ago. But the thing that finally woke me up wasn't the perfume. It was the money. I logged into our joint account one evening just to check a direct debit, and I saw a string of cash withdrawals that didn't make sense. £200 here, 150 pounds there, always from cash machines in parts of London she had no obvious reason to be visiting. I asked her about one of them. She told me she'd been shopping with a friend in Shoreditch and needed cash for a market stall that didn't take cards. It was a plausible lie. It covered one withdrawal, but it didn't explain the 14 others I found when I went back through 3 months of statements. I sat with that knot in my stomach for 2 weeks. I knew if I confronted her without proof, she would gaslight me. She would tell me I was controlling, that I was tracking her spending, that I was crazy. So I decided to get the proof. I contacted a private investigation firm in central London that specialized in matrimonial work. Within 24 hours, I was sitting in a small office near Holborn, explaining to a stranger why I thought my wife was lying to me. The investigator was professional. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered rules. He told me up front what they could and couldn't do under UK law. He said, "We can follow her on foot and by vehicle through any public space. We can photograph and video everything she does in public. We can place a GPS tracker on your car because it's registered in your name, but we cannot intercept her calls. We cannot hack her email. We cannot enter private property. If we cross those lines, the evidence is garbage, and you're the one who gets in trouble." I paid the £3,500 retainer from my business account so the charge wouldn't show up on our personal statements. They started surveillance the following week. It took them 5 days to destroy my marriage. The report landed in my inbox one evening while my wife was upstairs putting the children to bed. I sat in my home office, staring at my laptop with a glass of whiskey I couldn't bring myself to drink. The report was brutal in its clarity. She had been followed on 3 separate occasions to a flat in Bermondsey, a converted warehouse building about 40 minutes from our house. Each time, she arrived between 11 in the morning and noon and didn't leave until mid-afternoon. The investigator had done his homework. He identified the tenant of the flat through the electoral roll as a 38-year-old graphic designer who ran a small studio out of the building. The photographs left no room for doubt. They showed her entering the building. Timestamps confirmed she was there for hours. On one occasion, the investigator captured them leaving together, walking to a restaurant near Tower Bridge. He had his arm around her shoulder the entire time. My wife had been visiting this flat on days she told me she was at work. She was using our car to drive to the station, taking the tube across London, and coming home in time to collect the children from school like nothing had happened. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs, and I lay in bed next to her while she slept, knowing exactly where she had been 12 hours earlier. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I drove to a family law solicitor in Kingston. I sat down with a woman who spent the next 90 minutes explaining how divorce actually works in England and Wales, and she shattered every assumption I had. First, she told me that since 2022, there is no such thing as a fault-based divorce. You can't file for adultery and use it to get a bigger settlement. She told me plainly, the court doesn't care who cheated. The court cares about what is fair. In England, the starting point for any financial settlement is an equal split of everything. The house, the savings, the pensions, all of it. Because I was the high earner with a pension pot of £380,000 and a house worth £850,000, an equal split meant she would walk away with half of the assets my income had funded. I sat there, stunned. I was thinking, so she can cheat on me, lie to my face, and still take half of everything I built? That's when my solicitor leaned across the desk and said something that changed everything. She said, the court doesn't care about the affair, but it cares very much about the money. She explained that in a divorce, both parties have to fill out a Form E, a full financial disclosure. Lying on that form isn't just a rule violation, it's fraud. If the court finds out one party has hidden assets, the settlement can be thrown out and the dishonest party can be penalized heavily. She looked at me and asked one question: "Is there any chance your wife has been moving money?" I thought about those 14 unexplained cash withdrawals. I thought about her vague comments about her mother helping with savings. I thought about the secrets. I looked at my solicitor and said, "I think there might be." We brought in a forensic accountant. This is someone whose entire job is to trace money that people try to make disappear. She charged £275 an hour, but what she found was worth every penny. Over a period of 28 months, my wife had transferred a total of £67,000 out of our joint financial ecosystem. The accountant found a series of standing orders totaling £1,200 a month going into a savings account held in her mother's name at a building society in Surrey. That account had been opened just 3 months before the affair started. It held over £38,000, money that came directly from my earnings. She found another £11,000 stashed in a digital bank account my wife had opened on her phone and never disclosed to me. But then, the accountant found the smoking gun, the thing that made my blood boil. There was a payment of £14,500 made from the account in her mother's name. It was used as a deposit on a commercial lease for a space in Peckham. The lease wasn't for her. The lease was in the name of the man she had been seeing. My wife had taken £14,500 of money that I earned, washed it through her mother's account to hide the source, and used it to pay the deposit for her affair partner's graphic design studio. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was investing in another man's career using my money. When the divorce proceedings began, we were both required to submit our Form E disclosures. My solicitor advised me to file first and to be squeaky clean. I declared every penny, every account, every pension. My wife's Form E arrived 2 weeks later. It was a masterpiece of lies. She declared her small salary and her personal account with about £3,000 in it. She did not declare the savings account in her mother's name. She did not declare the digital bank account with £11,000. She did not declare the £14,500 she spent on her boyfriend's studio. She signed a legal document with a statement of truth, and she lied on almost every page. That was the moment we had her. My solicitor filed a response attaching the forensic accountant's full report, the private investigator's surveillance photos, and a line-by-line comparison showing every asset she failed to disclose. The gap between her lies and the truth was over £67,000. Her solicitor requested an urgent meeting within 48 hours. My solicitor told me later that the tone in the room shifted from confident to panic the second that forensic report hit the table. They expected a nice, easy 50-50 split. They were not prepared for a fraud investigation. In England, the court takes non-disclosure extremely seriously. If you lie to a judge about money, they have the power to tear up the rule book. We went to a financial dispute resolution hearing. The judge reviewed the forensic report and the surveillance evidence. He made it very clear that the non-disclosure was severe and that if we went to a final trial, she would be penalized heavily. After that hearing, her side collapsed. They came back to the table ready to settle, and the deal looked nothing like the 50-50 split she wanted. Here is how it ended. I retained the house in Richmond with its full equity, about £560,000. My pension, the biggest asset at £380,000, was split 63% to 37% in my favor, reflecting her dishonesty and my contributions. The £38,000 she hid in her mother's account, the court classified that as a marital asset she tried to conceal, so they deducted that entire amount from her share of the remaining cash. And the £14,500 she spent on her boyfriend's studio, the court treated that as dissipation of marital funds. Basically, money she wasted on non-marital purposes. They deducted that from her share too. Instead of the 5 years of monthly maintenance she demanded, The court awarded her a single lump sum of £45,000 to be paid over 12 months, a clean break. In the end, she walked away with roughly 34% of the marital estate instead of the 50% she would have gotten if she had just told the truth. She lost 16% of her settlement because she tried to be clever and hide £67,000. The affair didn't cost her a penny in the eyes of the law, but the fraud cost her everything. She moved into a small flat near her mother. I stayed in the house in Richmond because it was the only home our kids had ever known. The divorce cost me over £42,000 in legal fees, investigator costs, and forensic accounting. That is a staggering amount of money. But when I look at the difference between a 50-50 split and what I actually kept, that investigation paid for itself 3 times over. The hardest part wasn't finding out about the affair. It was realizing that the person I shared a bed with had been running a parallel financial operation underneath our marriage for years. The affair was a betrayal of trust, but the money, that was a betrayal of everything. It meant she was planning her exit while I was still working every day to build our future. If you are listening to this and you have that feeling in your gut, if the bank statements don't add up, if the stories sound rehearsed, listen to me clearly. The law doesn't punish people for cheating. Arguing about an affair in court is a waste of time and money. But if your spouse is hiding money, moving assets, or lying about their finances, that is where you can win. Get a forensic accountant, trace the transactions, and when it's your turn to fill out the forms, tell the truth. Because the moment you lie about money in a divorce, you hand the other person the weapon they need to destroy you. I came out of this with my house, my pension, and my self-respect. None of that happened by accident. It happened because I stopped crying about the affair and started following the money. And to the viewers in the U.S., I know the laws are different across the pond, but the lesson is the same. The truth always leaves a paper trail. You just have to be willing to look for it.